Hiniri ko Hiniri ka ahau. Kia ora, it's a privilege to be here this morning to speak with you. I come with two hats on. One is as an Anglican minister, and the other is as a lecturer in history at the University of Auckland. If I make any mistakes with facts or quotes, that's a minister speaking. It's a metaphor. Anything I get right, please tell my department that was great. So, I'm very similar, I think, to Lance and P in my analysis and the way I'm going to speak, but Ross got me here to be contrary, so I'll give it my best go in terms of this policy. My grandfather's sister, for reasons way beyond our comprehension, left Ngāti and went and married a Ngāpui, which was a great shock and horror to us, except we got an endless supply of kaimwana coming down from Ngāpui on a regular basis. This was a long time ago. But as a whānau, we have a connection to the most beautiful place in the world. What goes on camera stays on camera, called Te Rāwhiti in the Bay of Islands. I was there about 4 weeks ago. I was there, and this is confession time, to take the funeral of my nephew. My nephew was in his late 20s. I've talked to his whānau about this. They're happy for me to, well, they're not happy, but they know I'm going to share the story. He died. He had 3 children. It was not a good death. It was a death directly caused by drugs. He had grown up in a haze of weed. He had grown up not knowing reality from any other state of consciousness. He'd grown up surrounded with his peers, his whānau, his community. They have no jobs, they have no hope, they have weed, and that night he had trips because he'd saved some money. It was one of the worst tangi I'd ever been to, one of the hardest, one of the saddest, and we're still living with the consequences as a whānau of what my nephew chose to do and what he was pushed into. So when we're talking about drug policy, when we're talking all these big glorious ideas, when we're talking about social justice, it comes with the reality, and yes, it comes with the reality for all whānau, but for Māori it's exacerbated. It's made much more difficult for us to cope with in our vulnerable and marginalised communities. Now I understand that some politicians don't like our communities to be referred to that way, and ka pai, I understand where that's coming from, but that's some of our reality. That we really struggle to deal with these things. That tangi takes place all over the motu all the time. It could have been in Ngāti, this one happened to be up north. And it helps inform my views about this debate and inform my whānau's views. The night before the burial, it's the pō whakamutunga, everyone's supposed to come in and have their say. The Pākeke, who were very good, said, everyone come in, have your say about what he's done. Instead, there were hundreds of them across the road on the beach getting wasted. That's where they were having their debate, and now they're still having it on Facebook every day. Yeah, bro, smash it up, bro. They glorified him. We did our best to send alternative messages, but man, it's like throwing a pebble into the sea. It's so difficult to counter the culture that they're living in, that they find themselves in. That's the small. Now the big. Policy. What is policy? What is this thing, policy, that we're talking about? What is this miracle, magical wand that's going to solve all our problems, or possibly make them worse? Ungas is very interesting. Sandho is an amazing speaker, no pressure, I'm not building up the expectation too much, but wow, he's going to be great. But Ungas, the United Nations, is very important for us as a people. The context of colonisation was set for us by Lord Normandy in the Colonial Affairs Office in the 1830s. We've always been influenced as Māori and our hapu and our iwi by these big picture, by policy. We can't pretend we're little isolated pockets that make our own decisions, that have our own rangatiratanga entirely. We're part of a system, we're connected. UNCROC, the United Nations Agreement on the Rights of Children, for example, can be used to hold the government to account around the way we treat children in our communities. UNDRIP, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, has huge potential for us. These things offer us a way out. We have to work with them. It's very important. And people like Lance and organisations like Hāpai can help us lead the way in our communities in that discussion. I work with a Child Poverty Action Group. We understand the importance. When government pulls a lever, for good or bad, hundreds of our whānau are either going to fall further into poverty or get lifted up. And we see that all the time. Policy is incredibly important. But policy comes in a context, and our Māori context is colonisation. We constantly live with policy that doesn't care about us. In fact, if anything now, it's worse because of transparency, ironically enough. When governments, I'm afraid to say of any stripe, live off poll testing, then they're going to do what's popular. And nowadays they're going to get instant feedback on social media about that policy. So if they wanted to do something brave, suddenly they have hundreds, thousands of their constituents telling them, don't be brave, do what we want you to do. So policy, if anything's become even more challenging, especially brave policy that's going to break convention. Very hard to sell past the social media mess of communication that's out there. Also policy that doesn't care about Māori. Child poverty is an absolute reality in this country. Why? Why are we willing to let children die of rheumatic fever or bronchiolitis in this country? I'll tell you one little insight. If these were, and Pākehā kids getting rheumatic fever at the same rates, do you think we'd be putting up with it as a country? No. Because as a culture, as a society, we're willing to put up with brown poverty, with brown oppression, with brown being at the bottom. That's the way we're structured, that's the way we've always been structured. If I'm wrong, I'd like you to show me how. So social policy for Māori becomes a very difficult thing because of what New Zealand society is willing to put up with. So the challenge is, will we find our solutions in good policy? We have lots of social policy that comes in to play, and it's not reflected. We don't look back on social policy in this country. We don't have good debates about these things often enough. We just implement it. We congratulate ourselves on being nuclear free at the front of the... I'm not questioning the nuclear free policy, but we congratulate ourselves on being world leaders. We were the first to do this thing. We're so progressive, huzzah. We'll look backwards later and see what the victims we left along the trail of that policy. In fact, we won't look back. We don't look back. That's our history in this country. Okay, so far so depressing. Policy's not going to help us. My whānau's a mess. My whānau's a mess because I and we failed our whānau. We don't have enough discussions amongst our whānau, amongst our communities. Today is great, but we're too busy, some of us, we're too busy trapped on many other issues that take our priorities. You know, just because something is going to be legal, the reason I oppose reform, look, it's the stupidest idea ever, opposing reform. We've got a terrible drug law in this country that's oppressive and stupid, but anything that's going to increase use, anything that's going to decrease stigma. And we've seen what happened when you lowered that, when we lowered the alcohol ages. What was the impact of that for Māori? Anything that liberalises, anything that increases use, I'm going to have to be against, I'm afraid, because the impact's going to be amongst my whānau. We need to have these discussions amongst our whānau. We need to, regardless of whether it's legal, it doesn't make it right. We need to be having this kōrero with our young people in our schools, amongst ourselves. We need to stop being victims of policy and instead make our own whānau policy amongst our communities. That's what I advocate for. Again, my position is stupid but desperate. But I'm against just changing the law because it seems like a good idea, because unintended consequences are a hell of a thing, and I'm going to have to live with that with my whānau. Kia ora tātou.